to get us started, I need a volunteer. And it doesn't matter if I'm in a room with 1,000 salespeople, 3,000 sales leaders. What always happens is maybe one person is willing to volunteer. Then this person comes forward and I say, what's your name? So nice to meet you. Here's a $100 bill. Because whenever you get out of your comfort zone and you're a little bit nervous, that means you're growing. And so she really instilled that growth mindset in me. And she also...
Well, Jamie, thanks for coming on the show. Every leader has a story behind their success. Could you share your defining moment or experience that has shaped your career?
Gosh, that is such a great question. And thank you so much for having me. A defining moment that has shaped my career. I would say there are probably a couple. And one of them, in terms of my career and starting my own business, ProActivate, I think really choosing intentionally to work at very entrepreneurial companies to prepare me to start my own business, all in all, collectively was a defining experience that propelled me forward in starting ProActivate, serving as Vice President of Sales and Training and Development at Career Builder prior. And then prior to that, being in the traditional staffing industry, leading sales and operations. Both of those were very entrepreneurial experiences, David, that just led me to have exactly what I needed to then see a gap in the market and create a unique model to fill in that gap.
So I really wanted to understand from you, because you talk a lot about mindset and it being 80% of success compared to the skill set. So I wondered if you could expand on that a little bit and sort of explain why you see it that way and maybe some examples as to what you mean.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for that question. We spend so much time as leaders of organizations, as entrepreneurs, focusing on developing our skill sets or the skill sets of our team. And we have to have that, right? We've got to come to the table with the basic skill set. What so many of us forget to address when we're either looking at our own development or qualifying talent for our teams is the mindset component. And so to answer your question, if we think about the greatest athletes out there or the best of the best business people, and we start talking about the characteristics that separate them from the average or really, change the trajectory of their success, we'll talk about things like perseverance, grit, determination, mental preparation, things like that. And those are all characteristics of mindset. So while we have to come to the table with skill set, we've got to spend more time developing the mindset of ourselves and our teams and model that for our organizations and qualify talent based on both skill set and mindset. And that's just a missing gap. And I talk about it so much because I feel passionately and strongly that we can unlock underperformance and really solve that problem when we can transform the way we think and our teams think. And that's by developing this area of mindset.
How do you live on purpose with purpose, as you put it? And can you share how business leaders can become more intentional about aligning their own values with their organizational goals?
Yes. I love that question because right here, David, I have I don't know if you can see this, but my personal intentions. And I have them for every area of my life, professionally and many personal areas as well. And I think, one of the things about living fully on purpose, with intention, is knowing where we want to go. And I shared that with you just because this is a compass, right? How do we know if we got there if we don't know where it is that we are trying to get? And so looking at each area of our lives, very practically speaking, looking at each area of our lives, whether it's our professional life, our relational life, our family life, community, financial, personal development, fitness, health, wellness, whatever's important to you as an individual, whatever's important to the listeners, looking at those key areas and saying, where do I want to be 12 months from now? And creating goals that are consistent, like you said, with our values and with where we see ourselves and want to be. And I think, I like to take that a step further, because 92% of people never achieve the goals that they set out for. And so why is that? And a lot of it is because they don't write it down, and they don't have a clear plan, and they don't really know the why behind it. So I would say in this area for me, what I do is I don't just think about the what in each of those key categories, but what is the why? Because the bigger the why, the bigger the try, and the better the how. And then the third step is the how. It's that specific, measurable, attainable action that we're going to create that will lead to that what, which is the goal. But we've got to know the why behind it. And as leaders and entrepreneurs, one of the things we stop short of often is talking to our team members about their why. We talk about the company revenue quota, all of the things that are, those are really important things. But then when we can link it to their why, and it's bigger than just the quota, that's the company's why. But when we then link it to our team members' why, it's transformational in the conversations and in the performance. And then accountability, and then looking back at this document. That's why it's sitting here next to me on my desk, because monthly I look at it and make sure I have put in my calendar all of the hows that are associated with my goals. So that's a little bit about how I live with intention.
I'm absolutely with you on the importance of a why behind any what and before any how. My old sales leader used to say, if your why doesn't make you cry, it's not a good enough why, which was something that stuck with me. There needs to be something that means something to you more than just, I want to make money, which is what a lot of salespeople would say.
And yes, they would. And then for what and why, right? There's always a bigger why. I love what you said. I'm going to use that. I might give you credit once.
Nice. So with a follow up to that, what do you see for salespeople in particular and sales leaders? What do you see as some of the biggest mindset barriers that they have that if they could work on their mindset and deal with, performance would soar?
Yes. Okay. I mean, I think one of the biggest barriers is to our success, right? Is the way we think. And specifically, in terms of your question, it's breaking through those limiting beliefs. So oftentimes what holds us back are beliefs we've adopted at some point through experiences in our life that we're not even aware that we've adopted and agreed to. And therefore, they hold us back. And also, it's our own personal, and they're always associated. So that's why I said breaking through the limiting beliefs first, but it's our own self-talk, our own self-regulation. It's engaging in a higher level of thinking with some emotional detachment as to not react in the sales moment, but to respond in a way that is clear and concise and actually makes sense. And to be specific, let's think of a salesperson trying to close a deal and they get an objection. A lot of them want to just quickly respond, right? And just quickly give an answer, when really we need to engage our, what I call our inner CEO, but the prefrontal cortex of our brain, to slow down and think about what they're really saying. So we need to listen and then acknowledge what they have said, and then explore that to make sure we know what they're really saying before we just respond. And that takes some mindset work, not to get dysregulated, not to have negative feelings, self-talk, and to be able to think at a higher level. I love and I'm passionate about working with teams and organizations about breaking through these limiting beliefs and these barriers. That's what I did my TED Talk on specifically, and really figuring out what it is for individuals and how and when they adopted this really lie, this limiting belief that is holding them back. And it's typically about fear and not being something enough.
You advocate for a proactive approach to sourcing top talent. However, for SMB founders with limited recruiting budgets, what are some cost-effective ways to find, qualify, and hire A players?
That's such a great question. I would say, first of all, this in and of itself is a mindset of thinking of your pipeline as not just your pipeline for revenue, but your pipeline for your number one asset, which is people. And so, one of the best ways to do this is to always be doing it, always be interviewing great talent so that A, you're not holding on to C players long because that lowers the overall performance of the team. And B, you don't have a revenue gap when you do need to hire someone for either growth or replacing a C player with an A player, something of that nature. And we'll always make better hiring decisions when we have a great pipeline, so to speak, which is, I consider, our revenue insurance. And so, whether you have resources financially to invest or not, you can always be running referral campaigns. You can always be, sourcing or asking people, networking. You can, one of the reasons I created ProActivate was to be more of a flat fee, not, the very expensive fees for when you need talent desperately and you pay it because you're desperate, because you're being reactive. But by always, it's more of an approach to continuously have top talent at your disposal. So you're always prepared and you know when your next hire is. And so that type of approach is much more cost effective and strategic. And then it all starts really, and this is part of our process as well, is creating that ideal candidate profile, knowing your story as an organization of what would attract these types of people, and looking for the best of the best, not the best of the worst. Meaning, when you are reactive, you're typically you're posting or maybe having a quick career fair or whatever you do, it's typically geared toward the unemployed candidate. And in sales, that's not the best strategy because the best of the best salespeople are typically working. There are anomalies, but they're typically working and winning. And we need strategies on how to attract them. And part of that is your story. What's the difference? What's the culture? Why would they want to work there? So starting with that and being really clear on that and your ideal profile, and then creating a really good qualification process that you are interviewing on skill set, on mindset, and doing some simulation evaluations to see them in action.
What do you think, Becky? How does that land for you?
Agree. I think it makes a lot of sense to balance these things. I see a lot of people that will hire for startups tend to hire young people straight out of university. Hopefully, they've got some motivation behind them, probably no skill set. Let's just go and see what happens. And then I've seen the other side where it's let's hire people that are extremely experienced, they've got the perfect CV or resume, but they're not hiring for the cultural fit or the mindset fit. And that causes them problems later down the line or problems with their existing staff. So coming back to the 80% mindset, I guess 20% skill set, would you apply that same ratio or percentage towards what's valuable when you hire, or does it mold a little bit?
So I do. I think it's really important to qualify for both. Now, I would say you spend on your interview process, first and foremost, they have to have certain skill sets, right, for you to consider them qualified for the role. So you may spend some time up front to ensure that those basic qualifications are met. And then absolutely, we spend half of our qualification time talking about mindset components. And I recommend behavioral based interviewing, open ended questions, because past performance typically indicates future performance. So talking about, an experience that they had where they really had to demonstrate perseverance and how they did that. And and that can be related to the sale as well. It can be personal or professional, but we could say, tell me a little bit about the biggest deal you ever closed or the hardest deal you ever closed and how you worked through that process. and what challenges came up and how you overcame them. And that could be the question for perseverance as an example. But we're seeing real life situations. So I feel strongly that when we're interviewing salespeople, because salespeople are selling themselves in the interview process, right? They know how to sell. It's like, I think of recruiting salespeople like dating. You know, your first date is you're seeing the best of the best. I hate to say it like this, but it usually that's the best, and it only goes downhill from there. So you really want to dig under the surface. And with salespeople, stopping at the skill set where most companies do in the interview is not enough. So we've got to have the three-prong approach. And that's what we feel passionately about at ProActivate. It's the skill set component, the mindset component, and then some simulation evaluations to see them in action. And those components absolutely need to incorporate as well the culture of the organization, and because it has to be a fit all around.
I love that dating analogy there. This is as good as it gets. In your experience, what does a replicable sales formula look like, and how can CEOs or founders develop one for their business?
So it's really, really important to know that, right? Because that's important not only for hiring, but for you to continue to grow the organization. I think a replicatable sales model has all of the components of the sales process in there with details about how they are done and how often they are done. So it's your sales process from lead generation to closing and expanding the business. And it's each step of that sales call process outlined, but then specifically based on your quota, how many of each activities has to be done for this job function, for this individual to win. So if the quota is 100,000 of revenue a month and it takes 4 deals to get that done, how many sales calls do they need to get those 4 deals? And then to get that many sales calls, how much time appointment dialing is that? How much time with blueprinting, meaning, qualifying the leads, how much lead gen, and maybe this is split up into different roles, but whatever the role is, what needs to be done? What are the specific KPIs and metrics that need to be monitored every week to make that happen? Then it can be minimized, right? So if you say, for sure, worst case scenario, you have to have 10 sales calls every week to get those 4 deals a month. And to have 10 sales calls, you need to schedule 12 because 2 are going to cancel statistically, or whatever the statistics are. Then you must have that for the first few months of ramp up, or however long the ramp up period is. And then you track your metrics, and we'll adjust that formula for success accordingly. Maybe we find out you only need 8 appointments a week. And that's great information to have. Let's look at the first 90 to 120 days and evaluate that and create your own. But this replicatable sales model is your for sure way to hit quota by doing these activities that you can control. And then I think to have a really good formula and process that is replicatable, then it's like, what are the components of that sales call process scripted out? And obviously they put their own flair on it, but to have, to Becky's point about training and development, how important that is, to have great training in those key areas of the entire sales process to give someone all the tools they need for success from the beginning.
Again, absolutely in agreement with everything you say, Jamie. The way of breaking it down from this is what I want, and maybe that's revenue, maybe it's a close rate, maybe it's a particular thing that a sales individual is looking to achieve. The way my training years ago taught me to think about this was like a cookbook. If you want a cake, there are certain ingredients that go into it, and you've got to put it together in the right way. And then you can start to play. Once you've got that recipe and the same cake's going to come every time, then you can go, what if I added a bit more cocoa powder? Or what if I took away a bit of sugar? Or what if I added more butter? What would happen to the end result based on the individual taste, if you want to see it that way? So I really like that idea of tailoring it down to the individual.
Yeah, I love that analogy as well that you just gave of the recipe. And I think a good leader helps to really diagnose what each team member truly needs. And so it's like if someone came to you and said they have a headache, you could say, here's an Advil. Or you could say, tell me more about that. Are you having financial problems? Did you drink too much last night? Are you dehydrated? What's causing the headache? And I think so many times our sales team members or us ourselves are not hitting our goal. And then we start moving levers that aren't even necessarily related to it. And so this data of each component in the sales call process helps us realize, okay, wait, we did enough appointments, but they weren't with the right ideal client profile. Or we have a ton of appointments, but we're not converting them. So we need to really work on our overcoming objections piece of the sales call process or our discovery. And so there are a lot of components to it. And when we track some of that data, that recipe, as you say, then we can really help people hone in on how to maximize their success.
You conduct peak performance mindset workshops. Could you share some aha moments that participants typically experience and how that translates to real world sales growth?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, I do keynotes and workshops globally for sales organizations in this area of the performance mindset shift, really creating that peak performance. And I'll give you an example of something I do at the beginning that's a huge aha moment. One of the things, and this is just to create the awareness and get the engagement, is I'll share a story in the beginning, and then I say, okay, so to get us started, I need a volunteer. And it doesn't matter if I'm in a room with 1,000 salespeople, 3,000 sales leaders. It does not, a team of 20 salespeople. It does not matter. What always happens is maybe one person is willing to stand up and come forward and volunteer after that pause of everyone staring at you like, what is she going to ask, right? And then this person comes forward and I say, what's your name? So nice to meet you. Here's a $100 bill. And they're always shocked and, kind of surprised and say, what? Why? That's all I had to do? And I say, that's all you had to do. Everyone, let's give him or her a hand. They sit down and I say, okay, as honest as possible, in that moment, when I asked for a volunteer, what thoughts went through your mind? And people start sharing, and it always, they don't start at this level, but when we dig under the surface, it comes down to fear. I didn't know what you were going to ask. I didn't want to embarrass myself. I thought I wasn't going to be something enough, have enough information. I wasn't going to be smart enough. I wasn't, whatever it is, it's all about those limiting beliefs. And so I relate that, and that's a huge aha because it creates this awareness of how many times a day do we miss out on this theoretical $100 in all of these business scenarios and personal scenarios because we hold ourselves back, because we are the number one inhibitor or contributor to our own success. And I relate that and share how we have over 60,000 thoughts a day. And naturally, 80% of them kind of flip the script to that negative thinking. And we're not even aware of it. So that in and of itself is a huge aha. Then as we work through these talks, a lot of times, and of course they're customized, but we talk about living with a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And I liken the growth mindset to living in the solutions room and the fixed mindset to living in the situation room, and how we model the solutions room, the growth mindset, and get our team members to transfer. And as we continue, so we talk a lot about what is the current issue, right? Which is the way we think, and it does impact performance significantly. And then how to transform that by engaging in no-limit thinking, self-regulation, self-talk management, understanding our goals with the why, what, and the how, and things like that. And so those are all really important parts of the workshops of breaking through the limiting belief. And that's another huge aha moment, literally identifying and breaking through. both in our minds and physically. We do a breakthrough exercise, doing a solutions room experience, taking our biggest challenge and actually moving to the solutions room. And all of these things are said to increase, when we have a high performance mindset, increase sales by 38%. So it's pretty awesome to see these aha moments as we go through, but this is a lot of the feedback I get back in terms of what was most valuable.
If I may follow on that, you shared the question of just asking yourself, what else might I be missing out on with my limiting beliefs and my 60,000 thoughts a day? Are you able to give us a teaser or a sample in our conversation here of certain tools beyond that initial question that people can employ to maybe get them over that hurdle of limiting themselves from a more full experience?
One of the first steps in that is understanding your goals, your why, your what, and your how, so that you are aligned with them. Your daily activities are aligned with them. Your regular, so it's self-regulation, which is aligning your behaviors, actions, and beliefs with those goals. So that's one of the steps forward. And we also talk about how to literally override the automatic mindset operating system by engaging our prefrontal cortex to flip the script on the thoughts, how to do that. And you have to use that to engage in the self-regulation and the self-talk management, how to really look at things without getting emotionally charged, but to really use the catastrophe scale to manage your own self-talk, to talk to yourself like your own best friend. We talk a lot about self-activation. How do you condition yourself for peak performance? And then the breaking through limiting beliefs is a big component of, and this is something that we do within the keynote and the workshop, if it's in that area, is to really identify what your limiting belief is that you have come into agreement with without even realizing when did it start, how's it holding you back, and how can you exchange that belief with a new belief that will propel you forward.
I love it. Around the limiting beliefs, it's that saying, I can't remember who said it now, but whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, either way, you're right. And that's so true of I mean, anything bar, I think I can fly if I jump out the window. Anything apart from that in life, it applies, and we can see that.
I've always told my kids, whatever you believe will be, and they're like, and my daughter says, so if I think I can fly, so I'm laughing, like, except for that.
Speaking of your kids, one of the things I found in your TED talk that you talked about when you took your kids skiing, and I think it was your daughter just flew off down the mountain. Yep, let's go. This is going to be fun. And your son was frozen. I don't think I can do this. And you shared with him, it's not that she's a better skier than you. You're actually probably better than her in terms of skill, but she's looking at it differently. Do you find as a parent that I'm sure you have lots of moments, teachable moments, where you can sort of embed this mindset into your kids? And as kids, do they take it on quickly? How are you seeing that as a parent?
I love this question so much because whatever we do professionally relates so much to our bigger why. And my bigger why is my children, Campbell and Caden. And I absolutely see how applicable this is as a parent. And it really is applicable to any role within an organization and to anyone personally or professionally. As a parent, there are so many opportunities. I remember my mom taught me about a growth mindset when I was 16 years old by asking me before I did my first talk, are you nervous? And I said, yes. Like, should I not be? Almost like I was about to go do a talk in front of 500 people on optimism. And she said, of course you should be. And that's great. That means you really care, but that means you're growing. Because whenever you get out of your comfort zone and you're a little bit nervous, that means you're growing. And so she really instilled that growth mindset in me. And she also helped me start writing out my goals, my what, why, and how when I was younger. I mean, middle school, high school. And of course, it's on a different level than what we do professionally, but I do that with my kids and they've totally taken that on. And, it's just kind of something we always talk about and do now. And then this whole overcoming limiting beliefs, they use the language back. That's the only thing, is it can backfire, like most things as parents. But we talk a lot about failure as a stepping stone to success. So one time when they were younger, I asked them at the dinner table what they failed at that day. And it was the first time I asked them, and they looked at me like, what did I do? Did someone call you? Am I in trouble? And I said, no. But if you didn't fail at anything today, you didn't learn anything. You didn't grow, because failure is a stepping stone to success. And that is so relevant within our organizations as entrepreneurs, right? If our salespeople are frozen all the time out of fear, they're not going to step forward and maybe take some risks or make a mistake that they learn and grow from. And so, yes, it totally relates in parenting. It backfires when your kid said, well, I did this, bad thing, but failure is a stepping stone to success.
That's where my mind went when you
Yes,
said it.
of course.
You've worked with some large organizations such as Southwest Airlines and others. Could you share with us both what core leadership principles remain the same regardless of company size, and what mindset shifts should CEOs make as their business grows from a handful of customers to a larger operation?
Well, I love that question, because one of the things I speak on, and I've spoken to entrepreneurs on often, is how to create that high performance mindset culture with, just an entrepreneurial mindset. And so we've got to, as entrepreneurs, really model this solutions room mentality and this growth mindset. And I don't think it matters if you're in a small business or a super large company. It's really important that leaders learn it. A couple leadership principles. I think all leadership principles are really universal in terms of how they can be applied. The how may be different, but the importance of it doesn't change depending on the size of the organization. One leadership principle I feel strongly about, and I speak specifically on as well, is just the power of two, that exponential sales leadership. And it's really getting in the trenches with our team members, having the team members know that you're in it with them, and the power of leadership. And I think something important for us to remember as leaders is our job is not to motivate our people. They have to come to us motivated. Jim Rohn says, you can take an idiot and motivate them, and now you just have a motivated idiot, which I always think is so funny. But our job isn't to motivate. Our job as a leader is to help change the trajectory of their success. So if they could, on their own, perform at this level, at one level, then we would, through our leadership and through our development and through sharing with them really important feedback, help propel them to a much higher level. That is a leadership principle that is very important. The other is, and this is something I experienced when I was at Career Builder, the CEO showed up in my office one day and said, if I were to go around to each of your people and ask them what they believe the number one thing you think they need to work on is to get to the next level, would they know the answer? And that's how I got promoted to VP of Sales that day. I mean, the office was doing really well, and it had not been performing really well prior. And so he kind of wanted to see what was going on, but he wanted to know that my people knew what was the number one thing I believe they could do differently to excel at a higher level. And they did, because a great leader has regular one-on-one meetings with their people, and they're working on those key development areas. And so that in and of itself is really important. Another great leadership principle is knowing your team members' bigger why. That is something that really separates great leaders, because they're not just talking about quota anymore. They're talking about their team members' why and relating that quota. It's a totally different conversation. So yes, I've had the privilege of speaking at many small companies and many large companies. And I think these principles apply as entrepreneurs specifically. It starts with us, and we've got to model it. And we've got to create the right people around us that model it.
Where do you see, or what mindset shifts do you see companies need to make, or leaders within companies need to make as they grow? So if they start as a small startup, a handful of people, and they grow to a unicorn and hundreds or thousands of people, what's the mindset shifts that happen along the way that you would say are important?
Yeah, thinking bigger, right? As you get bigger, the problems you have are bigger. So really understanding how sometimes we create limits for ourselves. So for them as leaders to really break through limiting beliefs, one of the most powerful sessions I ever did was with a group of business owners, of entrepreneurs, and we did a breaking through limiting beliefs exercise. And there were people in tears. It was amazing and it was transformational because they learned, and I think this is a huge mindset shift to answer your question. They learned how to break through their own personal limiting beliefs, which also helped to really open up the success of the whole company, because oftentimes they're holding themselves back. And so that in and of itself was critical.
Speaking about support, this might be a slightly different topic, but could you speak to what a CEO should look for in your experience or your opinion when they're choosing an executive coach or a mastermind group to ensure they truly elevate their performance?
Yes, I love this question, and I do some executive coaching, and so I feel like I have some good insight here. One of the areas of mindset development is that imprinted mindset. You know, some of it's implanted from our parents and our caretakers, and we get to decide what of that we want to keep now. None of us are stuck with these things. We have a choice. And then the next level of mindset development is that imprinted mindset. And that does come from people around us. It comes from, you know, coaches, mentors, people on our personal boards, things like that. So I always tell people, if you want to grow in a certain area, have some people around, and you probably want to make an impact too to help others grow. So have both. But if you want to grow, have some people around you that are further ahead, that are really developed in the certain areas you need to grow in. Like if you kind of have a fixed mindset where you see problems and you just get stuck and you don't think of solutions and you see them as, you know, roadblocks versus stepping stones, then find someone around you who really does well in that key area. Or read a book of Dr. Carol Dweck, who's a pioneer in the field of mindset science and talks a lot about the growth mindset, or listen to a podcast, or join a mastermind group that has some members with more experience than you in those key areas. So surrounding yourself with the right people is really important. I love that you said that. And then, yes, if you can, hire an executive coach to really help you hone in on certain areas. You know, it's funny, a lot of people will ask me to do some executive coaching for different reasons, but I've had a few experiences where people, they want it because they want help speaking in front of people. And they want to get better at speaking, but they also want to just be more comfortable. So some of it is skill set by getting better at their craft and always improving their talks. And some of it is mindset. A lot of people, it's more so the mindset components. And when I work with them, we're talking about breaking through these limiting beliefs and their bigger picture goal and their why and those types of things. So those are all really important components.
So what are the other parallels in life or in business that you've experienced? Would you say that these skills transfer over to?
I think it transfers. That's such a great question. I wanted to make sure I heard it exactly how you intended. I think it transfers to relationships so much as well with anybody. You know, think about it. Think about just your relationship with your key people in your life. And when you sometimes react out of emotion because you have, you know, you're not thinking of it in the right way. You're overreacting. You don't have the emotional regulation. You're not engaging that prefrontal cortex. And then when you learn to stop and pause and evaluate and think at a higher level, you respond before you react. And that impacts your relationships, both personally and professionally. And then, of course, like you said, that example on the ski slope, I think of it with anything we do. That oftentimes we make a mistake and we say to ourselves, I'm a failure. But if it was our best friend, we'd be talking to them totally differently, knowing exactly what we know about ourselves even, if it was the same scenario. So then how does that apply in life? Talk to yourself like your own best friend. And if you started doing that, your performance in every area of life would be different, because you would see these things, these situations a lot more lightly. You'd have a bad meeting, you'd say that meeting didn't go well, but you wouldn't say I'm a failure. So I think it applies in parenting. I think it applies, for me, there are so many experiences. As an example, I've been a single mom since my kids were 6 weeks and 17 months old. And I led this group, Single and Parenting, at church years ago. And that is one of the reasons I got certified in this area of high performance mindset 10 years ago. I knew it could help businesses and sales organizations tremendously, but I also thought, oh my gosh, some of these women and men are letting these beliefs hold them back, and thinking that because of whatever their experience was that wasn't ideal, that they had to carry that forward in all areas of life. And that is something that has to change, and that we have to transform. And all of these things apply to thinking differently and really transforming our production, our creativity, our sales, our happiness.
What emerging trends in sales or leadership development do you believe people need to prepare for in the next few years?
Well, certainly, there's AI. That's an emerging trend. And I think we're all very aware that we need to prepare for how we interact with that, not avoid it, but interact with that to make us even more successful, and to not miss ever the human component. I think, the sales world has shifted in terms of, what different generational groups of talent look like and what they're thinking and what they want. And so one thing, we used to attract talent and qualify talent by just putting them through this very in-depth process and having them sell us. I've seen a total shift in trends where we need to really, and especially if you want the best of the best talent, we need to be sharing our story in the marketplace for what it's like to work with us. What is it culturally that separates us? So in the past, we talked about our competitive differentiators just in terms of selling out in the market. But what are our competitive differentiators in terms of attracting talent? And how can we take that story to the marketplace so that we maintain our competitive level and our competitive edge in terms of talent? So those are a couple of things I'm seeing.
So I know it's a hard thing to do, but if you had to boil it down to one piece of advice to give business owners in particular that might be struggling with sales or growth, what would be your one key takeaway?
I would say invest in this area of mindset development, and because that is where you'll see tremendous shifts.
I've got a few rapid fire questions for you, Jamie. What's your favorite mindset hack to overcome a tough day?
I love using positive affirmations. I do that daily, and my gratitude journal. I think when we think about what we're grateful for, it helps us overcome the other things. And then maybe just one more, asking yourself, what's another way of looking at this?
What's a book, aside from your own, that every leader should read?
Gosh, I think the Growth Mindset book by Dr. Carol Dweck is a game changer in this area.
Biggest misconception leaders have about sales teams?
That they're there only to hit quota.
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
I think my most impactful, and I don't know if it's a piece of advice, but it was just a way of thinking, really comes from my mom. My mom was just truly the most influential person in my life. And she really did teach me that in order to grow, you have to get out of your comfort zone. And I think that was the best piece of advice and a philosophy that we lived by.
So you are involved in a lot. I wouldn't even know where to begin. You're an executive coach at CXO Coaching, advisory board member at Women's Sales Pros, co-founder of Retreat, global keynote speaker, founder and chairwoman of ProActivate. Where would you like to direct people to keep up with all the stuff you've got going on?
Well, I would love if people would like to connect. I mean, certainly on LinkedIn under Jamie Crosbie, but as well, jamiecrosbie.com really collectively shares my experience in all the key areas that I could impact, both on the consulting and the speaking, coaching, any of those key areas, as well as talent resources to guide people back to ProActivate if they need help building really exceptional sales organizations.
Brilliant. We'll put those links on the screen in the show notes. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you feel we should highlight before we close today?
I don't think so. You guys, this was so great. It was so great to connect with both of you. I feel like we have so much alignment and synergies in how we think. And it was really fun just to have a great conversation.
Likewise. How about you, Becky? Was there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I think we covered so many bases, and it was really great to hear your perspective on things and be able to ask you some of these questions. So thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you, David.
Thank you.